Welcome to Project Management course. Today, organizational structures, phases and life cycles of a project. Topics for today: project phases, project life cycle, organizational structures, product life cycle, what is predictive life cycle and what is an adaptive life cycle. First of all, let's have a look at the organizational structures of a company. There are mainly three organizational structures out there. The first organizational structure is the functional organizational structure. In a functional organizational structure, the organization is functionally structured, and you can see it here as an example. On top you have generally always a CEO, and you have several departments. For example, engineering department, manufacturing, then the IT and the HR department. This is totally functional structured, meaning all the departments have their own staff. And the boss of each of the staff is actually the head of the department. So for example, person who is working for HR department, the boss is the vice president, therefore the head of the HR department. Same for IT, manufacturing and engineering. And in a project organization you usually have CEO on top, and then you have it mainly project, or as we learned last time, program based. And if you remember what a program is, so a program consists of multiple projects. So you have a program manager, which is then, so to say, the lead of one department, but managed by programs, therefore by projects. So the staff is only working on specific projects which will support the program. The third version is something in between, which is where the CEO again is on top, and is a so-called matrix organization. And as you can think of, you have first of all again departments, the same like in the functional organization. So you have for example an engineering department, a manufacturing department, IT and HR, but you also have program and project managers. And what now is happening is, of course, these program managers have partly own staff. The project managers can get their staff for specific projects from all of the departments. Yeah. So two people from engineering department, one from manufacturing, and people from IT and people from HR are actually supporting the project, but generally they are actually employed in their own departments. So this is actually a matrix organization. So regarding reporting in a functional organization, the functional managers report to the CEO. Then you have on the project organization the program or the project managers immediately report to the CEO. And in the matrix organization, this is something in between. So actually you have functional managers and you have project structures. So you also have program and project managers. And this is actually kind of a bit balanced. So people pretty often have to report to multiple bosses. So on the one hand, a person who's working in a project has maybe a kind of a project manager as boss in the project, but actually he's employed in a specific department, for example an IT department. Therefore he needs to report to his IT boss from the department, but of course also to the program or the project manager. There are several structures. There's a balanced, a weak and a strong matrix. We don't go into the details right now, but this is regarding how much power the project manager actually has in this organizational structure. So now we learned about the organizational structures. let's go now to project phases and project lifecycle. Project phases and project lifecycle. So you have in a project several phases, and generally the life cycle is the progression of these phases through a series of several development stages. So you go through, so actually collection of phases, so to say, a progression. So you go from one phase to another. Generally, in all these phases, something will be done. So work will be done usually. Makes sense. And at the end of one phase, for example, there could something pop out. Yeah. So here could something like a product can pop out of a phase. So imagine you have an analysis phase, and here is popping out a requirement specification. Yeah. So let's say this is an analysis phase. For example, this could be a design phase, and popping out is so several design documents or maybe a prototype. So design documents or prototype. So actually in a phase, but by the way, what also can happen is that these so-called deliverables, which pop out of a phase, they can of course also be created or delivered inside the phase. It's not necessarily said that at the end of a phase something must pop out. It's also possible that something can pop out in between. And this is also, let's say, preferably the way to go to deliver as fast as possible. Some projects just only have one deliverable really in the end. Yeah, this is also possible. So project life cycles can be either plan or change driven. So plan driven actually, so you're making a plan and you mainly follow the whole plan during all the phases. And change driven is actually that you expect changes during your project and you adapt actually your way to work and your planning. What do you generally need in the phases of project life cycle? So let's say in first phases you usually need lowest resources. So if you are beginning the project, you don't need 100 people in the beginning of the project, because you just maybe have only a base team which will set up the project, which will analyze the first requirements. Therefore, no need for a lot of people in the beginning. In the beginning of projects and first project lifecycle phases, the risk is of course higher. So you have the highest risk because you may not know all the details of the project. Actually, you learn more and more regarding the project. You have to talk to the customer a lot. So high risk because things are pretty uncertain. Things can change and things usually will change. Hard to estimate things and so forth. In this phase, the stakeholders have the greatest opportunity to influence the project. On the one hand, this is what you want to have because the customer, who is also a stakeholder, of course, he's the person who needs the deliverable and he must have kind of an influence. On the other hand, there are also multiple people which would like to have influence on the project and would like to lead the project in a specific direction, and maybe this is not wanted. So be aware of that in the beginning of your projects in early phases. Middle phases, there completing of the project really improves because you know a lot of things right now. The requirements may be a bit more clear. There's usually, let's say, the phases in the middle where you really get the work done. And then you need more and more resources. So you actually can plan a bit better. So you can put more resources on all the tasks which are to do. And in the final phases of project life cycles, then actually what the plan then in the end is, you need to ensure that the requirements were met. So what the customer really wants, and the sponsor approves the completion of the project in the end. Some example projects, let's have a look. Take this as an example. You have a concept, you have a development, implementation and closeout phase. And just an example, what could pop out of the concept phase could be a business case. So your company is creating a specific concept in the beginning. What you can and what you usually also do in projects is, and what the management would like to see very often, is a preliminary cost estimate. And maybe you also do just a high-level work breakdown structure in the beginning. So have an idea, what are the main things, the main work which you have to do, the main components. Just list them up in a WBS, in a work breakdown structure, so you have a rough idea and you can go on. Next phase could consist of working on the project management plan with all the plans you need to create. We will learn about that later in the course. And then a budgetary cost estimate, so getting the budget, so making a more precise estimation for getting a budget from the management, from your sponsor for this project, and a more detailed work breakdown structure. Again, this is just an example of things you can do, you could probably do in the specific phase. Implementation phase is then, for example, the execution of the work. So you really do the work. So maybe you even improve your cost estimates. You're doing reports and so forth. In the closeout phase, you just complete all the things. You do the lessons learned, and you get the customer acceptance, for example, in meetings, or the customer's doing some tests or whatever things which need to be done in the end. Project life cycles. Now let's have a look. Product life cycles. So as you know, when you're doing a project, you create a product or a service. Yes, during a project you can deliver a product already, or you, and this is usually what you do, at the end of a project you have a product which is meeting all the requirements from the customer. So actually you are done, the project is closed, is terminated, and then you have, in the end of a project, you have a product coming out. You have several phases, yeah, all these is a project, and then in the end you have a product which is coming out. Okay, so we looked at all the life cycle of the project, but now we were looking at the life cycle of the product, because actually the life cycle of the product begins inside or during the project already, because it's created. So you start working on it. Products, and this example is like an information system, have life cycles. And there we have the Systems Development Lifecycle, SDLC, which is a framework for describing the phases. And these life cycles, there are a predictive life cycle, predictive product life cycle, or an adaptive software development life cycle. The predictive life cycle is actually something which is plan driven, right? So you make a plan how to build the product, what the scope is. You have a specific schedule and cost, which is kind of predictable, and then you follow mainly the plan how to build your product. And you have an adaptive software development life cycle. So this is usually the case when you have requirements which cannot be very clearly expressed. So they're not clear in the beginning, or you only know a few requirements, or you have a pretty new product in a pretty new market. But again, you want to build a product, but maybe you don't know how it will look like in the end of the project, or of multiple projects. So then you need another development life cycle. Let's have a look at some of the predictive lifecycle models. For example, waterfall model, spiral model, incremental build model, prototyping model, rapid application development model. Well known is actually, or the term at least, is the waterfall model. You follow this waterfall model actually if it is very clear what you have to do. So very well defined, and you have several stages of development, and so you pretty much know what you have to do. So you did, for example, these processes very often, even though your product is very specific, but the way to build the things is pretty clear. And then you follow a waterfall model actually, right? For example, you would build a house usually in a waterfall model. You have clear phases. It's kind of, yeah, not so hard to plan to build a house. Spiral model shows software is developed using an iterative or spiral approach. We will have a look at that in the other page. Waterfall model, several phases, pretty clear. You usually end a phase and then you're done. And the spiral model, where you can see maybe you see several phases again, so maybe you have to redo some phases because things get more clear, and therefore you have to do, for example, you start with a small analysis, you do a design, implementation, testing, and then you do an analysis again, then you do design again, and then you do implementation again, and so forth. Let's look to adaptive lifecycle. Adaptive lifecycle, for example, agile development. Agile development life cycles are adaptive life cycles, as well as incremental and iterative life cycles. So how does it look like? Agile development, many people heard of that. So this course is not specifically handling that, because this is handled in another course. For example, Scrum, very well known, or Kanban, and so forth. Let's have a look how the software development life cycles, how they are kind of structured. So what can I imagine behind these life cycles? Predictive, you see at the top. So you have several phases actually. You have planning, you have analysis, you have design, you have implementation, test, and the deployment, and then you're actually done. So very pretty much straightforward. So, but it's there, you don't expect any big issues. It's pretty much just doing the work, planning the phases. Maybe some things change, but not a lot. The next thing is incremental. So what you want to do is you work actually on several increments of your product. And here you can see, so you have your phases in smaller parts. So you do planning, analysis, design, implementation, testing, and deployment around about 1 to 3 months long, and then you create a part of your project already, and you do the same thing then in the next 3 months. So you build increments of your software. So if you have your software over here, so this is your end software, so you build the first part, then you build the second part, you build this part, maybe you build another part here, and so forth. So this is actually the idea, making increments. Then you have the iterative life cycle, where you have multiple iterations, iteration 1, iteration 2, iteration 3, and so forth. And you can see one iteration consists again of the phases of the software development life cycle phases of planning, analysis, design, implementation, testing, and deployment. And this is then usually an iteration of 1 to 4 weeks. And after 4 weeks, you again deliver a small piece of your software after 4 weeks. And after the next 4 weeks, you again build a small piece. Then you again build a small piece, and so forth, up to the end. Yeah, then the project is actually done, or your product is actually finished. Just a hint, note that usually projects can use combinations of incremental and iterative life cycles, because actually during an iteration you normally create an increment of your software. Normally projects are doing this, so building an increment of your software. Thank you very much for watching. See you soon.